What would you do if the same night your sister stole your fiancé in front of the entire city, you signed your trembling name beside a stranger's on a folded contract, and only discovered far too late that you had just accidentally married the most dangerous man alive? The pen was still warm in her hand when the room understood what had happened. Glasses froze halfway to painted lips. The cruel laughter that had been aimed at her curdled into stunned, terrified silence. In one reckless heartbeat, the overlooked sister everyone had spent the evening pitying had bound herself to a man whose name people were afraid to say out loud. This is a story of betrayal, hidden worth, and the fierce, unexpected devotion of a ruthless man who saw a queen where the whole world saw a leftover. Cora Hale had spent her whole life being the other sister. She was soft where Vivian was sharp, quiet where Vivian was dazzling, generously curved where Vivian was runway thin, and she had learned young to fold herself small and let the light fall on someone else. While Vivian swanned through galleries and galas, Cora kept the books for the family's failing trattoria, balancing crooked ledgers late into the night, stretching every cent until it screamed, quietly holding the whole crumbling enterprise together with nothing but grit and a mind sharper than anyone bothered to notice. Nobody noticed. To her father, she was a disappointment in an apron. To Vivian, she was a convenient shadow. And to Grant, the handsome, ambitious man who had proposed to her 8 months ago, she was, it turned out, a placeholder. Cora had believed Grant loved her. She had cooked for him, covered his debts, done his accounting for the small firm he was always bragging about, and she had let herself dream, for the first time, of being chosen. The engagement party was meant to be her night. Held in the private room of a glittering downtown hotel, it was the one evening the overlooked sister was supposed to stand in the center of the light. She wore a deep wine-red dress that hugged her lush curves, and for a few fragile hours, she almost felt beautiful. Then she went looking for Grant, and found him in a shadowed alcove with his hands in Vivian's hair and his mouth on her sister's throat. The floor dropped out from beneath Cora's feet. She did not scream. She stood frozen in the doorway as the two of them broke apart, and Grant, caught, did not even have the decency to look ashamed. He looked annoyed. "Come on, Cora," he sneered, straightening his jacket. "Did you really think I'd walk down the aisle with you when I could have her? Be realistic. You were good for the books. That's all." And Vivian, her lips curved in cool triumph, whispered the cruelest thing of all, "Don't make a scene, B. It's embarrassing enough that you're wearing red." Cora backed out of the alcove, her heart shattering into jagged pieces, and had no idea that across the ballroom, a man carved from stillness and menace had just watched the entire thing and had decided, in that instant, to change the course of her life. The man watching from the far side of the room was Dante Marchetti, and he was the reason grown men lowered their voices in this city. He was tall and broad and dressed in a charcoal suit cut with lethal precision, and he carried a stillness so absolute that the air seemed to thin around him. He was the head of the syndicate that owned half the docks and every powerful pocket for 100 miles, a man who could end a rival with a single unhurried nod. And he had come to this hotel tonight for reasons that had nothing to do with a jilted bookkeeper's ruined party. His grandfather's will had a cruel clause buried in it, an old-world provision that would hand the entire Marchetti empire and every soul who depended on it to his scheming cousin unless Dante was lawfully married before his 35th birthday. That birthday was midnight tonight, and the arranged bride, a rival family's daughter, had lost her nerve 2 hours ago and fled the city. Dante stood at the edge of the ballroom with a glass of untouched amber whiskey and a deadline closing around his throat like a wire, watching the powerful and the beautiful preen, feeling nothing for any of them. Women had thrown themselves at him for years, socialites and models with calculating eyes, and he had looked through every one of them as though they were empty glass. He was surrounded, and he was profoundly, bone-deep alone. Then a soft woman in a wine-red dress stumbled out of an alcove with her heart visibly breaking behind her eyes, and something in Dante Marchetti went very still and very focused. He watched her absorb a betrayal that would have flattened most people. He watched her refuse to cry in front of the crowd. He watched her square her trembling shoulders and lift her chin even as her whole world came apart. And he saw, in that single unguarded moment, more courage and more quiet dignity than he had encountered in a decade of ballrooms full of the powerful. He set down his glass. Cora had fled to a quiet side room off the main hall, pressing her back against the cool wall, breathing through the urge to be sick, when the door opened and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Dante Marchetti filled the doorway. Up close, he was overwhelming, and the scent of him, cedar and tobacco, and something underneath that whispered danger, wrapped around her senses. "You are the bookkeeper," he said. It was not a question. Cora blinked, wiping at her eyes, too gutted to be properly afraid. "I don't know who you are," she said, "but I would really like to be alone." "I am the man who owns the debt your father has been hiding from you," Dante said, and watched the color drain from her face. Cora's stomach plunged. She knew the trattoria was drowning, but she had not known how deep, had not known her father had borrowed from men like this. "For 100,000, Dante continued, his voice unhurried. "Due in full, with interest, in 6 weeks. The kind of debt that does not end with a foreclosure." Cora's knees weakened. And then Dante did something no one had done for her all night. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and offered her a way out. "I have a proposition, Colomba," he said. "I need a wife before midnight, or everything I have built falls to a man who will burn it down. You need your family's debt erased before it costs your father his life. Marry me tonight. Sign one contract. Your family walks free, and you walk out of this hotel not as the woman who was left, but as the wife of the most powerful man in this city." Cora stared at him, certain she had misheard, certain it was a cruel joke. "It is not a joke," he said, as if reading her mind. "It is the only honest offer you will get tonight." He drew a folded document from his jacket and a heavy pen, and he held them out. And somewhere down the hall she could hear Grant's laugh and Vivian's triumphant voice, and something inside Cora that had been bending her whole life finally, gloriously snapped. She took the pen. Her hand was shaking so hard she could barely grip it. Every rational voice in her head screamed that this was insane, that she knew nothing about this man beyond the fear his name inspired. But she thought of her father's terror, of the sneer on Grant's face, of a lifetime spent apologizing for the space she took up, and she pressed the pen to the paper and signed her name in bold, defiant strokes. The efficient Dante's people produced was quiet and quick, the vows over in 90 seconds, and when it was done Dante slid a heavy, flawless ring onto her trembling finger, and it fit as though it had been made for her. For a dizzy moment Cora stared at the ring catching the light, at the stranger who was suddenly her husband, and waited for panic to swallow her whole. It did not come. What rose instead was a strange, steadying calm, the sense that for the first time in her life, she had chosen something rather than simply endured it. Dante watched her face with an intensity that made her breath catch, as though he could read every thought crossing it. "You did not flinch," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Everyone flinches." She lifted her chin. "I am done flinching," she said, and something flickered in his dark eyes that looked, impossibly, like respect. She had walked into that hotel a jilted bookkeeper. She walked back into the ballroom on the arm of the city's most feared man, and she had no idea she had just triggered a war. The reaction was instantaneous. Conversation died. The crowd turned, and there, at the center of it, stood Vivian and Grant, their cruel smiles faltering as they registered the enormous man beside Cora and the way his hand rested with unmistakable ownership at the small of her back. "Well," Vivian recovered first, her voice a poisoned trill as she looked her sister over. "Cora, sweetheart, what on earth are you doing? Did you wander off and attach yourself to a stranger to save face? It's embarrassing." She turned a dazzling smile up at Dante. "You'll have to forgive her. She's always been a bit desperate and, well, a bit much. I'm the sister worth your time." Grant chuckled beside her, emboldened. "Seriously, man, trade up while you can. She's good for spreadsheets, not for a man like you." The temperature in the ballroom plummeted. Dante did not raise his voice. He looked at Grant the way a man looks at something scraped off his shoe, and then he looked at Vivian, and when he spoke, his voice was soft, silken, and absolutely lethal. "This woman," he said, "is my wife, Cora Marchetti." The name fell over the room like a blade. "She is worth more than every person in this room combined, and the two of you just humiliated her for the last time in your lives." Vivian's smile shattered. Grant went pale. "You," Dante continued, his dead gaze fixing on Grant, "run a small financial firm. I own the building it operates in, and starting tomorrow morning, I will be taking a very close look at your books." His eyes cut to Vivian. "And you traded the only good thing in your family for a cheating coward with debts he cannot cover. Congratulations." The crowd had gone utterly silent, every guest suddenly fascinated by their shoes. Cora stood beside her impossible new husband, trembling, and felt something she had never once felt in that family. She felt protected. Dante turned to her, and for just a moment the lethal mask softened. "Come, Colomba," he murmured, draping his heavy suit jacket over her bare shoulders, enveloping her in warmth and cedar. "You never have to stand in a room like this alone again." He guided her out past her gaping sister and her ashen ex, and Cora walked out with her head high for the first time in her life. But as the great glass doors closed behind them, a man on the far side of the ballroom lowered his phone with a smile that never reached his eyes, because Dante Marchetti had just done the one thing that ruined everything, and the soft, overlooked woman on his arm had just become the most inconvenient obstacle in the city. The man with the cold smile was Silvio Marchetti, Dante's own cousin and consigliere, the silver-tongued second who had spent years positioning himself to inherit. Silvio had been counting on that cruel clause in the old man's will. He had bribed the arranged bride to flee. He had planned for midnight to pass with Dante still unwed, so the empire would fall neatly into his waiting hands. And now a nobody in a red dress had signed it all away with a single stroke of a pen. Silvio smiled and began, very quietly, to plan a widowing. He had money, patience, and a decade of Dante's trust, and he intended to spend all three. The soft, overlooked bookkeeper, he was certain, would be the easiest thread to pull loose. It was the single greatest miscalculation of his careful life. In the weeks that followed, Cora moved into the Marchetti estate, a fortress of stone and glass overlooking the water, and braced herself for a cold, transactional marriage. Instead, something impossible began to happen. Dante, who trusted no one, found himself drawn to her. She was clumsy in the enormous house, forever getting lost, forever apologizing to the staff, but she was also relentlessly, disarmingly real, and she treated the frightened housemaids and the scarred guards with the same warmth she showed everyone, and slowly the fortress began to thaw around her. Dante caught himself coming home early from brutal meetings just to find her curled in the library, or humming in the vast kitchen where she had befriended the cook and taken over the baking. He learned that beneath her soft, apologetic exterior lived a mind that never stopped working. One night, spreading the syndicate's tangled financial records across the kitchen table because he was too restless to sleep, he found her reading them upside down and quietly pointing out 3 inconsistencies his own accountants had missed. "Who taught you to read a ledger like that?" he asked, staring at her. "Nobody," she said. "I taught myself, keeping a dying restaurant alive." He poured her a small measure of amber whiskey and set it beside her without a word, the way a man offers something he does not know how to say aloud, and they worked side by side until the tall windows went gray with dawn. It became a habit. Night after night, she found herself across a table from the most feared man in the city, untangling his empire, and night after night, he found himself telling her things he had never told another living soul, about the father he had buried and the trust he had learned to bury with him. She did not flinch from the darkness in him. She simply saw the man underneath it, and for the first time in his life, Dante Marchetti felt truly seen. He looked at her for a long, charged moment, and Cora felt the air change between them. That charged current did not stay contained. The following week, Dante did something that stunned his entire organization, walking his new wife into a lavish commission gala, a room thick with the city's most lethal men and the coldly beautiful women who orbited them. Cora, terrified, wore a gown of deep midnight blue and pressed herself to the edges of the room, certain she did not belong. She did not go unnoticed for long. A striking socialite named Bianca, a woman who had spent years auditioning to be Dante's wife, intercepted her near the champagne, letting her eyes rake over Cora's curves with open contempt. "So this is the little accident Dante married," Bianca purred, loud enough to carry. "Tell me, sweetheart, does he keep you around for the cooking?" Cruel laughter rippled through the beautiful crowd, and for a moment the old shame rose in Cora's throat. But before she could shrink, the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees, and Dante was there, sliding an arm around his wife's waist, pressing a glass of amber whiskey into her hand to steady her. "Bianca," he said, his voice deadly quiet, "you are speaking to my wife, and the sharpest mind in this room. She unraveled a theft my own accountants missed for 2 years. What have you ever done but count another man's money?" The socialite's smile shattered. The crowd went silent, then found sudden fascination with their drinks. Dante bent his head to Cora's ear. "You do not shrink for anyone anymore. Colomba," he murmured, "not in my world, and not in front of me." And Cora, the whiskey warm in her hand and his arms solid at her back, felt the last of her old smallness begin, quietly, to burn away. That night, back at the estate, he walked her to her door and paused, and for one breathless moment his hand rose to cradle her jaw, his thumb brushing her cheek, and Cora thought he might kiss her. Instead, he only looked at her, memorizing her, and murmured good night, and left her standing there with her heart pounding like a girl's, terrified of how much she had begun to want a man the whole world feared. But the peace was an illusion. Cora, being Cora, had started quietly reconciling the estate's household accounts, unable to help herself, and the numbers had begun to whisper. Money was moving in patterns that made no sense. Small schemes routed through a maintenance company and a shell firm, siphoned steadily out of the family's legitimate holdings by someone with high-level access and a talent for hiding. She did not understand all of it. She understood enough to be frightened. And late one rain-lashed night, tidying the study Dante had left unlocked, she found a ledger open on the desk and traced a single signature buried beneath the forgeries, and her blood ran cold, because the hand skimming the empire was Silvio, the cousin Dante trusted with his life. She did not know that Silvio had already realized she was auditing the books. She did not hear the study door click shut behind her. Cora spun, the ledger still in her hands, and found Silvio standing in the doorway, his cold smile firmly in place. "Clever girl," he said softly. Dante always did have a weakness for strays. He stepped into the room, and Cora saw the glint of the small pistol in his hand, and understood that he had not come to talk. "You have been poking at things that do not concern you," he continued, unhurried. "My cousin married you on a whim to save his little inheritance, and in doing so he cost me mine. I cannot undo the marriage. But a grieving widower is a very sympathetic figure." Cora's heart hammered against her ribs, but her mind, that overlooked, underestimated mind, was already moving faster than her fear. She had spent her whole life being dismissed by people who never once imagined she was paying attention. She did not scream. She did not faint. She did not run. She looked Silvio dead in the eye and did the one thing he never expected. She smiled. "You should really check your accounts before you do anything permanent, Silvio," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Because an hour ago I finished mapping every dollar you skimmed, and I set it to send itself to Dante and every captain in this family the moment my phone stops receiving a code that only I know how to enter. Kill me, and you do not just lose your inheritance. You expose yourself to the entire syndicate as a thief who stole from his own blood." Silvio's smile flickered. He had not planned for the bookkeeper to be armed with anything but numbers. And in his half-second of hesitation, the study doors burst open. Dante had come home. Time seemed to fracture. Dante took in the scene in a single glance, his wife backed against the desk, his cousin's gun raised, and something ancient and murderous moved across his face. He did not shout. He crossed the room with the speed of a striking predator, and Silvio, panicking, swung the pistol toward him. But Cora was already moving. She hurled the heavy ledger at Silvio's gun hand with every ounce of her strength, and the shot went wide, splintering the bookshelf, and then Dante was on him. Outside, the storm that had been building all night finally broke, lightning throwing the study into stark white relief, thunder rolling across the water like the growl of something vast and awake. It was not a fight so much as an ending. Dante disarmed his cousin with brutal, practiced efficiency, twisting the arm until the pistol clattered to the floor and slamming him back against the wall hard enough to rattle the windows. Marco, Dante's loyal lieutenant, appeared in the doorway with 2 armed men a heartbeat later, and the trap that Silvio had spent years building snapped shut around him instead. Dante held his treacherous cousin by the throat, his voice a lethal whisper. "You raised your hand against my wife," he said. Then, keeping the man pinned, he turned his head and looked at Cora, and the murderous cold in his eyes dissolved into raw, naked fear. He released Silvio to Marco's men and crossed to her in 2 strides, his large hands moving frantically over her arms, her face, her trembling shoulders, checking for blood, for wounds, for any sign the world had hurt what was his. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his breathing ragged, his voice cracking against her hair. "Did he touch you? Look at me. Breathe. Tell me you are all right." "I'm all right," Cora wept, finally letting the terror crash over her, her fingers twisting in the lapels of his jacket. "I stopped him, Dante. I made a dead man switch out of a spreadsheet." He pulled back just enough to frame her round, tear-streaked face in his hands, and he looked at her the way no one in her whole overlooked life had ever looked at her, as though she were the most precious and formidable thing ever made. "You are magnificent," he breathed. "My own men missed what he was doing for 2 years, and you unraveled it at a kitchen table." He pressed his forehead to hers in the wreck of the study, and for the first time since grief had frozen him solid, the most feared man in the city simply held on to a woman as though she were the only warm thing left in a cold world. "I thought," he said hoarsely against her hair, "that I had married you to protect an empire. I was wrong, Colomba. I did not understand until this moment that I would trade every brick of it just to keep you breathing." Cora pulled back to look at him, this lethal man undone, and she pressed her palm flat over his hammering heart. "Then it is a very good thing," she whispered, a wet laugh escaping her, "that I am extremely difficult to get rid of." Silvio, the cousin who had smiled at Dante for a lifetime while plotting his death, learned the price of underestimating them before the week was out. Dante did not act in blind rage. He let Cora spread the recovered ledgers across the table, and together, over cold coffee and the sound of rain against the tall windows, they traced every stolen cent, every forged manifest, every account Silvio had bled. When Cora finished, she looked up at her husband with a quiet, steady certainty. "You do not need to make him a martyr," she said softly. "You need to make him nothing." So they did it her way. They stripped Silvio of every hidden dollar, exposed his theft to the commission he had hoped to rule, and let the very families he had schemed to impress cast him out. He was left alive, bankrupt, disgraced, and utterly powerless. His name turned into a warning whispered across the underworld, a fate the old men agreed was far crueler than a quick and merciful end. And the debt that had once hung over the Hale family like a blade was gone. But so was Cora's patience for the 2 people who had started it all. Because Cora had not forgotten the alcove, or the sneer, or the whispered cruelty about the color of her dress. She simply understood, as she always had, the quiet mathematics of consequence. She took Dante's offer to look at Grant's firm and turned it into a scalpel. Grant, it emerged, had been embezzling from his own small clients for years, sloppily, arrogantly, certain no one clever enough to catch him was watching. Cora had watched. She compiled the proof she had quietly gathered during their engagement, every falsified statement, every stolen retainer, and she delivered it, anonymously and irrefutably, to the authorities and to every client he had ever robbed. Grant's world collapsed in a single week, and Vivian, who had traded a loyal sister for a charming man, found herself shackled to a penniless fraud facing indictment, abandoned by the glittering circle that had only ever loved her proximity to money. Months later, on a bright winter afternoon, the 2 of them came to the Marchetti estate to beg. Cora received them in a sitting room warmed by golden light, draped in rich emerald silk that celebrated every curve she had once apologized for, and she did not gloat, because she no longer needed to. Please, Vivian whispered, her poise gone, her eyes red. "You have all of this now. You could make it go away. Talk to your husband. Help us." Cora looked at her sister for a long moment, and she felt no cruelty, only a clean, quiet closing of an old wound. "I spent my whole life shrinking so you could shine," she said gently. "You call me desperate. You call me too much. You took the man I loved, and you laugh while you did it. I am not going to hurt you, Vivian. I am simply going to let you live in the life you built." She rose, smoothing the emerald silk over her hips. "The debt is settled. We are done." And she watched them go, and felt, at last, entirely free. Dante found her at the tall window afterward, watching the snow fall soft over the water, and he came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her soft waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You showed them more mercy than they deserved," he murmured. Mercy is its own kind of power, she said. Besides, I would rather build than burn. He turned her gently in his arms, his dark eyes soft in a way the rest of the world would never see. I married you to save an empire, Colomba, he said quietly. I did not know I was saving myself. Do you know what you are? You are the only person who ever looked at everything I am and did not flinch, and did not calculate, and did not want anything but the truth. He tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his touch reverent. You are not the sister anyone settled for. You are the one they all should have fought for, and I am the luckiest man alive that they were too blind to see it. Cora looked up at the most dangerous man in the city, a man who bowed to no one and yet bowed, entirely, to her. And for the first time in her overlooked life, she believed she was exactly enough. She had been the other sister, the placeholder, the one good for spreadsheets and nothing more, and she had accidentally married a monster and discovered, instead, a home. She had been told she was too much and never enough, all at once, and she had proven the whole cruel world wrong, because she alone had ever offered him something real, and she alone had turned a night of humiliation into the beginning of a kingdom. If Cora and Dante's story of betrayal, unexpected love, and hard-won vindication warmed your heart, if you cheered when the overlooked sister rose from a ruined engagement party to become the queen of the city, then do us a small favor before you go. Smash that like button right now. Share this story with someone who believes the person everyone underestimates is always the one to watch. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss another twist-filled tale of the overlooked soul who finally gets everything she deserves. And drop a comment below and tell us, what was your favorite moment in Cora and Dante's story?